My name is Evelyn Hart. I'm 36 years old, and I work as an environmental scientist, someone who for most of her life believed that hard work and quiet persistence would eventually earn her a place in her own family. But I was wrong. So painfully wrong. The day I sat at that long mahogany table watching my parents hand my sister Marissa a check for $10 million, while looking at me like I was a stray they couldn't wait to shoo away. It was the day everything I thought I knew shattered. My mother's voice, sweet as poison, rang out like a polished dagger. "And for you, Evelyn, go earn your own." My father smirked, his fingers drumming against the polished wood, as if he couldn't even be bothered to meet my eyes. Marissa smiled, her perfectly painted lips curling just enough to let me know she relished every second of my humiliation. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't even blink. But inside, I was breaking quietly and visibly the way I always had since I was a child in this family. The room smelled of old money and fresher betrayal. The lawyer had already closed his folder when something unexpected happened. A second man, an older gentleman in a tailored gray suit, stood up from the corner where he'd been silent the entire time. His voice was soft, but carried the weight of finality. "There's one more document." My mother's smile faltered. My father's fingers twitched. Marissa's eyes sharpened like knives. The man unfolded an envelope worn at the edges, stained by time. My grandfather's handwriting unmistakable even from across the table. My breath caught. The room shifted. What came next would dismantle every careful lie they had built around me, every secret they thought would never see daylight. That letter, sealed by the only man in this family who ever saw me for who I really was, would change everything. As the man cleared his throat, I noticed my mother's hand clutch the chair arm, her knuckles blanched. And then, when the first words were read aloud, she did something I never thought I'd see. She started screaming. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about money. This was about legacy justice and the truth they had buried so deep they believed it would never surface. But I was still here, and I wasn't going anywhere. Under the weight of their gazes, my mother's icy smile, my father's indifference, Marissa's smug satisfaction, I sat perfectly still. But then, just as the lawyer began to gather his papers, a voice cut through the tension like a cold blade. "There's one more document." I turned. An older man, sharp in his tailored gray suit, rose from the back corner. I didn't know his name then, but I would come to know him well, Mr. Harold Keene, my grandfather's personal attorney, the last thread tying me to the man who raised me with quiet kindness. In his hands he held an envelope. It was old, creased, faded, the edges softened by time. But the handwriting, I recognized it instantly. My grandfather's. I felt something shift in the air, like the room had tilted without moving. My mother's smile twitched, faltered. My father's lips thinned to a grim line. Marissa's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something fear breaking through her perfect facade. Without a word, Mr. Keene stepped forward and laid the envelope on the table directly in front of him. He didn't rush. He didn't smile. He simply said Mr. William Hart left this letter to be read only in the presence of his family in the event of his passing. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady but loud, pressing against my ribs. My fingers tightened around the armrest. My mother's voice, brittle, now cracked the silence. "Is that really necessary? We've already covered the will." Mr. Keene didn't flinch. This was his explicit instruction. I gave my word. A breath, a single fragile breath, passed through the room. Then slowly he broke the seal. In that moment, I understood the truth was coming. But it was coming too late. Too late for me to hold his hand again. Too late to hear his voice say that he was proud of me one more time. Too late for every phone call I never received, every memory they stole from me. I watched as the first lines of my grandfather's handwriting were read aloud. My name on his lips even after he was gone. The edges of the world blurred. And then it happened. My mother gasped, clutching her chest. Marissa's expression collapsed. My father's face drained of color. My mother's voice, once so controlled, broke into a scream that shattered the air. The lie they had buried for years was rising, and there would be no way to bury it again. The first time I saw the old farmhouse again, it felt like stepping onto a stage where the performance had long since ended, but the echo still haunted the walls. The air smelled the same fresh pine-wet earth, the faint trace of wood smoke. But everything else had changed. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I stepped out of the car, the wind biting sharp against my skin. The porch sagged slightly, the white paint peeling in jagged strips. The wind chimes above the door, a sound that once meant safety. Childhood summer's iced tea on the porch now sounded hollow, distant. I hesitated at the door, my hand resting on the worn brass handle. For a moment I considered walking away, but then the door creaked open before I could knock. "So you finally decided to show up." Her voice hit me like cold steel. My grandmother Margaret Hart stood there, thinner than I remembered, her silver hair pulled back tight, her face carved with the kind of lines that come not just from age, but from bitterness. I managed a quiet, "Hi, Grandma." She didn't move aside. Her eyes, sharp as broken glass, scanned me from head to toe, and I could see it, disappointment, suspicion, hurt buried so deep, it had become something colder. "They told me you wouldn't come," she said flatly. "They said you'd moved on, that you had more important things now." Her words sliced deeper than I expected. I swallowed. "That's not true, isn't it?" Her voice hardened. "Your grandfather called for you every day at the end, every single day. He thought you'd walk through that door, but you never came." I felt something cave in my chest. My throat tightened dry and raw. I didn't know I said softly. I never even knew he was sick. "I tried, Grandma. I came here in March. I knocked. Marissa told me no one was home." Her eyes narrowed, lips pressed into a thin line. "We were here. We never left." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind shifted, rattling the loose shutter beside the window. I forced the words past the lump in my throat. "The funeral. They told me it was at noon. I showed up, but the church was empty." Her breath caught. The first flicker of doubt crossed her face. "The funeral was at 9, she whispered, her voice barely more than air. "They told everyone you didn't show, that you didn't care." My knees felt weak. I leaned against the porch post for balance. "I would never have missed it," I said, barely able to push the words out. She looked at me, then really looked, and something in her eyes shifted. The hardness cracked just slightly. She stepped back without a word, leaving the door open. I followed her in. The house smelled like cedar and old paper. The living room looked almost untouched by time, but the air was thick, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. She disappeared into another room and came back clutching something in her hands, a small worn leather notepad. "This is the number he kept calling," she said quietly, handing it to me. I took it. The handwriting stopped me, cold block letters, neat but familiar. I read the number twice, then again. "Grandma," I whispered, my heart pounding. "This isn't my number. I've had the same one since college." Her fingers trembled. She sank slowly into the armchair by the cold fireplace. Her voice cracked. "They told us you changed it, that you didn't want to be found." I shook my head, tears burning at the corners of my eyes. "No," I said. "They lied. They kept me away. On purpose." She closed her eyes, her face pale, her hands twisting together in her lap. Oh, God. And just like that, the first domino fell. I followed my grandmother into the dim living room, the floorboards groaning beneath our feet. The air inside felt heavier than the chill outside, as if the house itself had absorbed years of silence, betrayal, and unspoken grief. She moved slowly, her frail hands running along the top of an old sideboard. Without looking at me, she whispered, "Wait here." I stood frozen, my fingertips brushing the edge of the wooden table where I had once as a child spent hours building puzzles with my grandfather. The room hadn't changed, the faded floral wallpaper, the dusty shelves lined with books he used to read aloud to me. But something inside me had. The ground I thought was solid beneath my feet was already shifting. Grandma returned, carrying a small stack of papers, her hands trembling. She sat down carefully, breathing heavier than before, and laid the pile on her lap. She picked up the topmost item, a battered leather-bound notebook, and handed it to me without a word. I recognized it instantly. My breath caught. It was my grandfather's field journal, the one he always carried, filled with sketches, observations, little notes to himself. My name was scribbled on the first page in his unmistakable handwriting. My throat tightened as I carefully flipped through the fragile pages. Some were crinkled, smudged with soil and ink. But what stopped me cold was the series of phone numbers written over and over in different pens in different hands. "He kept calling this number," Grandma said softly, her voice barely more than a breath. "Every day. He thought it was you." I frowned, staring at the sequence. "It wasn't mine. Not even close." "Grandma," I murmured, "this isn't my number. I never changed it. Not once. I would have answered. I would have come." Her eyes lifted to mine, clouded with confusion and something deeper dread. They told me you didn't want to be bothered, that you had a new life, that you were too busy." I shook my head, the weight of the years pressing against my chest. "They lied to you," I said quietly. "They kept us apart on purpose." Her hands shook harder. The notebook slipped from her fingers. She pressed both palms to her mouth, her breath quickening, her eyes wide and wild. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Oh, my God." I crouched in front of her, reaching gently for her hands. "Grandma, listen to me. I came here in March." I knocked. "Marissa told me you were away. They told me the funeral was at noon. I showed up, but it was over. I never even knew he was sick. They made sure I wouldn't." Her face collapsed, crumpling in on itself like a brittle leaf. I thought you didn't care. I thought he was calling into silence." I swallowed hard, the back of my throat burning. "No," I said. "I never stopped caring. They just made sure we never spoke." She let out a strangled sound, a mix of anguish and disbelief, and her body folded inward. I steadied her, but she seemed to shrink beneath my touch. "All this time," she whispered, "all this time I believed them." The clock above the fireplace ticked louder than I could bear. The wind outside howled through the cracked window pane, but neither of us moved. She closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. It was in that moment I understood this wasn't just my betrayal. It was hers too. They had stolen from both of us. Time, connection, love, all carefully, cruelly erased. And now, piece by broken piece, the truth was clawing its way back to the surface. The knock at the front door was sharp, insistent. I stood in the kitchen, my heart thudding in a slow, steady rhythm as my grandmother moved toward the door with the kind of determination I hadn't seen in her in years. She opened it without ceremony. They filed in one by one, my mother Lorraine dressed in her habitual navy suit, with her signature pearl earrings. My father Charles cool and aloof, his eyes scanning the room like he was above it all. And Marissa, who barely glanced at me before casting her eyes over the furniture, the walls, the life they had left behind. None of them knew I was here. Yet. I thought this was handled. My father murmured, his voice as polished and detached as ever. My grandmother's tone was ice. "It isn't." The lawyer, Mr. Keene, arrived moments later, setting his briefcase down on the coffee table like it was a loaded weapon. He greeted them with polite professionalism, but wasted no time. "We're here," he began, "because Mr. William Hart left instructions that cannot be ignored." That was my cue. I stepped forward from the shadowed hallway, and 3 pairs of eyes locked on me at once. My mother's expression cracked, her lips parted, but no words came. My father stiffened. Marissa's perfectly composed mask faltered, her breath visibly catching. I took my seat across from them without a word. The letter was read, every line deliberate, every word slicing through the air. The inheritance wasn't just the $10 million for Marissa. It was more. My grandfather had left me the Whitman Agricultural Research Annex, its patents, its assets, and most importantly, his handwritten letter spelling out everything they had done to keep me away. The moment the last word was spoken, the room erupted. "This is absurd!" My mother snapped, her voice shrill. "This is some kind of mistake," Dad Marissa blurted, her hands trembling. Tell them this isn't right." My father's eyes darted toward the lawyer, but I could see it, there was no ground left to stand on. I lifted my hands calmly, palms open. "You can say whatever you want," I said quietly, "but the evidence is here." I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin folder, sliding it onto the table. "Phone records," I continued. "Showing the number Grandpa called wasn't mine. I still have the same number I've had since college." I placed another sheet down. Text messages from Marissa's phone to Grandma telling her I was unavailable, that I was traveling, that I didn't care. And then another. The funeral program. The real one. It says 9 o'clock. The email you sent me says noon. The room fell into a dense silence, the kind that suffocates. Marissa shot to her feet, her voice shaking with outrage. This isn't how it happened. I visited him. I was there. I was the one who stayed." I met her eyes steadily. "No," I said softly. "You were the one who made sure I couldn't be." My mother's face flushed red, her voice desperate. We thought it was better this way. He was old. He was confused. It wasn't malicious." "Stop," I interrupted gently but firmly. "You can spin it however you want, but the truth is the truth. You cut me out. You made me the outsider." I turned to my grandmother. "And you were lied to, too. You deserve to know he wanted me there." Her face was pale, her eyes brimming, but she nodded. "I see it now," she whispered. "I should have seen it sooner." Marissa's fists clenched. Why should she get anything she wasn't here? I stood, the weight of the moment pressing into my bones. "I wasn't here," I agreed. "Because you made sure I wasn't." My voice stayed calm, but the words landed like strikes. "I'm not here to beg for acceptance. I'm here because the one person who saw me, who truly saw me, left me something that matters more than money." No one moved. No one spoke. The house, the land, the past, all of it had finally shifted. And none of them could control it anymore. For a moment, none of us spoke. The only sound in the room was the slow tick of the antique clock above the mantel, a clock I remembered too well from childhood visits, where I would sit at this very table, small and unnoticed, as conversations floated above my head. Back then, I thought being invisible was just part of growing up. I didn't realize it was intentional. I drew in a breath, steadying myself. "You want to talk about who was there?" I said quietly, my eyes never leaving Marissa's. "Let's talk about what it was really like to grow up in this family." Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. My mother's gaze darted to the window. My father exhaled sharply, irritated but silent. I kept my voice even, but inside my heart was pounding with memories I had buried for so long, it almost hurt to dig them up. I remember the science fair when I was 9. I began. I stayed up for weeks building a model of the local ecosystem. "I won first place. Do you remember what happened?" No answer. I pressed on. "You, Mom, didn't come. You were at Marissa's ballet recital." Dad barely glanced at the trophy when I brought it home. "And Marissa?" I turned to her, my voice colder. "You laughed. You said it looked like a school project for weirdos." Marissa's mouth twitched, but she said nothing. I let out a breath, steady. That was just one moment, one of hundreds. Every time I tried to shine in my own way, every time I brought home something I was proud of, an award, a scholarship, a research article, you found a way to dismiss it. Or worse, to make me feel like I was an outsider in my own family. My grandmother's face had gone pale, her hand pressed to her mouth. And when I stopped trying, I whispered, when I stopped bringing things home, you didn't even notice. It was easier that way, wasn't it? Easier to focus on the daughter who fit your version of perfection. Marissa's voice cracked sharp. That's not fair. You isolated yourself. You always made yourself the victim. I shook my head slowly. I didn't isolate myself. I was erased. You rewrote the story to make yourselves the heroes. The weight of the words pulled the air from the room. I could see it, my father's discomfort, my mother's barely masked panic, Marissa's growing desperation. I remembered the way they always circled the wagons, always chose appearances over honesty, always kept me on the outside no matter how hard I tried to be enough. I missed Grandpa's last days. I continued softly because you made sure I would. You changed the narrative, you manipulated the facts, and you did it so smoothly I almost believed it was my fault. My hands rested on the table palms flat. But it wasn't. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was suffocating. Marissa's eyes glistened, but her voice stayed sharp. I did what I thought was right, she murmured almost to herself. No, I corrected gently. You did what was convenient. You smiled when you needed to. You visited when it served you, and you made sure I was invisible the rest of the time. I shifted slightly, my voice softening. I'm not telling this story because I need your approval. I'm telling it because, for the first time, the truth is louder than the lie. My grandmother blinked hard, tears on her lashes. I should have seen it, she whispered. You couldn't have, I said gently. They made sure you wouldn't. Marissa sat down suddenly, her hands trembling. My mother looked away. My father closed his eyes. I leaned back, the weight of years lifting, but only slightly. I'm not the same girl you silenced, I murmured. And this time you don't get to control how the story ends. The room once filled with the false warmth of curated family was cold now, exposed. And for the first time in my life, I felt the ground shift beneath their feet, not mine. I sat perfectly still, my fingertips tracing the edge of the table, as the weight of everything that had been unsaid pressed down on the room. No one moved. The only sound was the soft rustle of the lawyer's papers and the faint creak of my grandmother's chair. And then quietly, but with absolute precision, Mr. Keene cleared his throat. He adjusted his glasses eyes, scanning the final document in his hand. There is one more matter, he said softly. Mr. Hart left explicit instructions regarding his charitable trusts. I glanced at my parents. A flicker of something sharp passed through my mother's eyes, too fast for most people to notice, but I saw it. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his fingers curling tight around the armrest. Mr. Keene continued. A thorough audit was completed shortly before his passing. There are discrepancies, significant ones. The Hart Community Trust, meant to fund agricultural scholarships, and environmental research shows multiple unauthorized withdrawals over the past 8 years. The words landed with the force of a hammer. My heart thudded in my ears. I barely breathed. Withdrawals, Mr. Keene went on, made, using access granted to Charles and Lorraine Hart. Marissa's head snapped toward them. What she whispered, her voice brittle. My mother's face drained of color. There must be a mistake, she stammered. We managed the trust on his behalf. It was all approved. It wasn't, I said quietly, my voice steady, but every muscle in my body coiled tight. It was never approved. It was theft, quiet, careful theft. And you knew exactly what you were doing. My father's jaw tensed. We provided oversight. We helped with expenses. Those funds were used to support the family. The family, I repeated, my voice colder now. Or to renovate your second home in Naples. Or to fund Marissa's startup that mysteriously failed, but somehow gave you both new cars. My grandmother covered her mouth, her eyes wet with disbelief. "Charles," she whispered, "is this true?" He looked at her, but his expression was empty, hollow. I let the silence hang, then drew in a breath. "I'm not here to scream. I'm not here to throw things or burn this house down the way you burned everything I believed in. But I'm also not going to let this slide." My mother's voice rose in panic. "Evelyn, please, we can talk about this. We can fix this." I shook my head. "Not this time. I've already engaged legal counsel. There's a team reviewing the financials and an independent investigator handling the trust's assets. This isn't personal." I added, though, every nerve in my body screamed otherwise. "It's legal." My father stood abruptly pacing. "You'd really take your own family to court over a misunderstanding?" I met his gaze without flinching. "I'd take anyone to court who stole from the people that money was meant to help. Grandpa built that trust to change lives, not to pad your pockets." Marissa's face twisted. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "No," I said softly, dangerously calm. "You've just spent too long thinking no one would ever call you on it." The stillness that followed was suffocating. No one spoke. No one could. The walls of this house, once so carefully constructed from denial and false warmth, were finally cracking. I stood slowly. "You have lawyers," I said. "So do I. Let's let the truth decide." And for the first time, I saw the flicker of real fear in their eyes. The realization that I wasn't the girl they could manipulate anymore. I wasn't afraid of them. Not anymore. The days that followed blurred into a relentless rhythm. Legal meetings, document reviews, conference calls with people I had never met, but now trusted more than the ones who shared my blood. I woke each morning in the old farmhouse, still half expecting it all to be some fevered dream. But the reality was sharper, colder, and far more permanent. I sat at the worn kitchen table, my grandfather's table papers spread out before me. Beside me sat Alicia Tran, a financial forensic specialist with nerves of steel, and a voice calm enough to steady my own. On the laptop screen, our legal counsel Daniel Rowe outlined the next steps in quiet, measured tones. The preliminary findings Daniel explained show clear patterns of misappropriation. There's little doubt this would stand up in court. We can move forward on both civil and criminal grounds if you choose. I knotted my fingers, pressing into the wood grain of the table. I could feel the tremor beneath my skin, fear, anger, exhaustion. But I kept my voice steady. "I want everything documented," I said. "I want the truth to be undeniable." Alicia offered a small smile, her eyes sharp with respect. "It already is." The wind outside rattled the window panes. Somewhere down the hall, the old grandfather clock chimed a sound that transported me back without warning. I closed my eyes. And there he was. I could see him, William Hart, sitting across from me at this very table, his hands stained with soil from the garden, his eyes kind beneath bushy white brows. I was 10, maybe 11 legs swinging beneath the chair, showing him my latest science journal with all the pride a child could carry. "I don't get it," I'd muttered back then. "Why doesn't anyone care about this stuff? Why don't they care about me?" He had smiled softly, wiping his hands on an old cloth. "Sometimes, sweetheart," he'd said, "people mistake noise for value." But he had tapped the center of my forehead gently. "You think in roots and branches. You think in growth." I remembered the way his voice lowered, serious but warm. "Legacy," he said, "isn't wealth. It's dignity. It's what you leave in people's lives, not their wallets." I swallowed hard, forcing myself back to the present. Alicia was saying something, but her voice felt distant. I raised a hand gently. "Can we take a moment?" She nodded, gathering her papers without question, leaving me alone for a few minutes of silence. I let the memories settle. The old house around me creaked and sighed. I could almost feel him here, the steady presence he'd always been. Not flashy, not loud, just good. I thought about everything they'd done to erase me. The lies, the manipulation, the cruelty that had passed for affection. But here, right here, none of it held any weight, because the one person whose opinion had ever mattered had already chosen me long ago. I pulled one of the older field journals from the stack beside me. The leather cover cracked the pages thin and yellowed. His handwriting filled every corner. Notes on soil pH, on bee migration, on plant resilience. And in the margins, sometimes little quotes, fragments of poetry, snippets of hope. I found one foreword scribbled in fading ink. Kindness shapes the earth. I smiled despite the ache in my chest. The next call came in an hour later. Another expert. Another strategy meeting. I sat straighter this time, my voice clear, as I outlined my position. No aggression, no cruelty, just the truth. We would move forward carefully, deliberately, legally. I wouldn't become them. I wouldn't let vengeance eat me alive. But I also wouldn't let them bury the truth one more time. As the call ended, I glanced out the window toward the fading light on the horizon. The wind stirred the tall grass, the last rays of sun catching on the old magnolia tree, where Grandpa once carved my initials. Legacy isn't wealth, it's dignity. And I finally understood exactly what he meant. The first sign came quietly, a news headline buried deep in the local paper. Just a short paragraph, neutral language, subtle framing. But I recognized the tone immediately. A family ripped a misunderstood daughter lashing out after an inheritance dispute. I sat in the living room of the farmhouse, the newspaper open on my lap, my fingers cold despite the warmth of the fire. My breath caught in my throat. I read it twice then, a third time. The words felt surgical, designed to wound without ever drawing visible blood. They were already rewriting the story. By the end of the week, it wasn't just the local press. A regional lifestyle blog picked up the narrative. Then a morning radio segment. By the time a national tabloid ran the headline, "Bitter Heiress Sparks Family Scandal Over Fortune," it had spiraled beyond anything I could control. I should have seen it coming. My mother had spent decades mastering the art of appearances. My father knew exactly how to pull strings in the background. And Marissa, she had always known how to perform when it mattered. They framed themselves as the victims. They painted me as unstable, ungrateful, vindictive. The comments online were brutal. Strangers called me greedy, called me jealous, accused me of dragging a good family through the mud for my own gain. Some accused me of lying about the entire thing. Others, worse, suggested I was mentally unwell. I could feel the ground shifting beneath my feet again. But this time, I refused to fall. I sat with Alicia and Daniel the next morning, both of them grim-faced, as the headlines flashed on the screen behind us. "They're controlling the narrative," Alicia said softly. "They're positioning themselves as sympathetic." I nodded, my voice low but steady. "I know. That's what they do." Daniel folded his hands. "You have legal standing, Evelyn. The facts are on your side. But the court of public opinion, it's a different battlefield." I exhaled slowly, my hands resting flat on the table. "I don't want to play dirty," I said. "I won't leak private details. I won't smear them the way they're smearing me." Alicia's eyes softened. "Then we hold the line," she said. "We let the truth stand on its own. But we also make sure you're not isolated. We build your voice back." I thought about that, about what it meant to hold the line, when everything in me wanted to scream, to fight to burn it all down in the same way they had tried to burn me. Instead, I did something else. I told the truth. I gave one interview to a quiet, respected journalist who agreed to hear the full story without spin. I spoke calmly. I told them about the stolen time, the lies, the quiet manipulations. I told them about the research center, the community work, the people my grandfather had wanted to help. I never once raised my voice. I never once attacked. And still, the backlash came. I read the comments at night when I couldn't sleep. I saw strangers tear me apart as if they knew me. I saw old classmates sharing articles, adding snide remarks. Even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years chimed in, choosing sides as if this was a game. For a while, it broke something in me. I sat in the dark some nights staring at my reflection in the window, wondering how it was possible for the truth to feel so lonely. But then I remembered him. I remembered my grandfather's voice, soft but firm. Legacy isn't wealth, it's dignity. I repeated it to myself until the words steadied me. I wasn't here to win a popularity contest. I wasn't here to be liked. I was here to protect something that mattered, to hold my ground, not with noise, not with venom, but with truth. The following week, I released a simple statement. No accusations, no drama, just facts. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tide began to shift. A few quiet voices started to speak up. Former scholarship recipients of my grandfather's trust shared their stories online. A former board member wrote an open letter of support. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I knew then they could spin the story however they wanted. But the truth, the real truth, had roots. And I was still standing. I didn't panic. I didn't post frantic denials or lash out the way they probably hoped I would. Instead, I sat in the quiet of the farmhouse, listening to the wind push against the old windows, and I made a choice. If they wanted a war, I wouldn't give them one. I would give them the truth. I started by going literally back through every piece of my grandfather's life that I could still reach. His office upstairs untouched since the last time he sat there. The old filing cabinets, the drawers full of paper so brittle it threatened to crumble in my hands. I spent hours combing through records no one else cared to look at: handwritten ledgers, photocopies of letters bank statements from decades ago. And then I found it. Tucked into an envelope marked personal correspondence was a series of letters between my grandfather and the Hart Family Foundation's original financial officer, an older man named Gregory Slade. The letters were blunt, dated 6 years earlier, and they raised clear concerns about missing funds, unexplained wire transfers, and unauthorized expenses. One letter, written in shaky handwriting, ended with, "I'm worried this will not stop until someone says something." The breath left my lungs. I photographed every page, scanned them into secure files, and sent them straight to Daniel and Alicia. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was systemic. I kept going. I reached out quietly to former employees of the foundation, people I barely remembered from family events. I asked gentle questions. Some didn't respond, but a few did. And what they shared painted the same picture over and over: money that went missing, budget reports that didn't match, fear of speaking up because my father's reputation in the business world was untouchable. Piece by piece, I built the case. I wasn't loud. I wasn't messy. I moved with the kind of precision I knew my grandfather would have respected. In between, I found moments of stillness. Sitting on the back porch at dusk, watching the light fade over the fields, holding my grandmother's hand as she slowly began to understand just how deep the betrayal went, not just against me, but against her, against the man she had loved for half a century. She cried one night, not the noisy kind, but the quiet, broken tears of someone who realized she had defended the wrong people for too long. I didn't say anything. I just sat beside her, letting the silence carry what words couldn't. By the end of the second week, I had enough to move forward. Daniel called late one evening, his voice calm but with an undertone of urgency. "Evelyn," he said, "we have what we need. It's clear. This goes beyond civil litigation. We're talking about potential fraud charges, breach of fiduciary duty, possibly even criminal prosecution if the authorities choose to act." I let the words settle. I could almost hear my grandfather's voice in the stillness of the room. Legacy isn't wealth, it's dignity. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I wasn't even doing it for myself anymore. I was doing it because some things matter more than comfort. Because when people twist love into manipulation and call it family, someone has to say no more. I exhaled, steady. "Move forward," I told Daniel. "Whatever it takes, we don't stop until the truth stands." And with that, the first real step toward justice, quiet, deliberate, unstoppable, was set in motion. The courtroom smelled like old wood and tension. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, listening as the attorneys laid out the evidence piece by piece. No shouting, no theatrics, just cold, undeniable facts. The financial documents we had gathered, pages and pages of quiet betrayal, were projected onto the courtroom screen. Wire transfers, forged signatures, falsified meeting minutes. Every carefully buried secret was pulled into the light. I kept my face calm, my breathing steady. But inside I could feel the weight of every moment that had brought me here, every time they dismissed me. Every time they twisted my absence into proof that I didn't care. Marissa sat across from me, her hands trembling in her lap. Her eyes darted between the exhibits on the screen and the attorney's words. I watched the color drain from her face. She had always been the picture of control, composed, charming, polished. But not today. The judge's expression didn't change as the prosecutor methodically laid out the timeline. The Hart Family Trust had been siphoned for years. Funds intended for environmental research scholarships and rural development had quietly vanished into private accounts, luxury properties, and shell corporations tied to my parents. At one point, my mother tried to interject, her voice soft, the practiced tone of a woman used to manipulating the room. "We had no idea these errors occurred," she said. "We trusted our advisors, but Daniel Calm Precise presented the email chain, her name on every approval, my father's initials on every authorization." Marissa shifted uncomfortably. Then she broke. Her voice cracked through the silence. "I didn't know," she said suddenly, her words thin and frantic. "I didn't know they were using the trust that way. They told me." She stopped, her eyes filling with tears. The courtroom froze. My parents looked at her stunned. I thought it was legal," Marissa whispered. "They told me it was just reallocating." The judge's pen tapped softly on the desk. The prosecutor gave her a cold, sympathetic nod, then turned back to the evidence. The unraveling had begun. I felt no joy in that moment, no triumph, only clarity. I watched as the people who raised me, the people who shaped my fears, my silences, my doubts, sat in absolute stillness, powerless for the first time. The truth was no longer theirs to control, and I was no longer theirs to silence. The verdict came 2 weeks later. The court ruled in my favor: full control and restitution of the Hart Family Trust, civil penalties, mandatory audits. There was talk of criminal referrals, but I let the lawyers handle the details. I didn't need to see them in handcuffs. That was never the point. I stood on the courthouse steps that afternoon. The press clustered in the distance, flashes of cameras barely registering in my mind. Daniel stood beside me, his voice low. "We can release a statement," he offered. "We can spin this however you'd like." I shook my head gently. "No spin," I said, "just the facts." I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate, because winning didn't feel like winning. It felt like standing in the ruins of something that was never truly whole. That night I returned to the farmhouse. I sat in the living room alone, the firelight soft on the worn furniture. My grandmother had already gone to bed. The house creaked softly, the way old houses do when the wind brushes against them like ghosts. I thought of my grandfather, William Hart. I could almost see him in his favorite chair by the window, reading one of his endless books. His hands strong but gentle, his voice low, thoughtful, never hurried. He would have hated this outcome, I realized. Not because justice wasn't served, but because of what was lost in the process. He believed in second chances, in repair, in quiet redemption. He believed that dignity mattered more than pride. I closed my eyes and let the memories come. Him teaching me how to graft a tree branch, the way he'd hold my notebook at arm's length, squinting over my scribbled bee observations. The day he told me, voice soft but unshakable, that kindness was not weakness, that walking away from cruelty rather than matching it was its own kind of strength. I opened my eyes to the sound of a soft knock. It was Maria, one of my closest friends from university, who had flown in quietly the day before the verdict. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just sat beside me, handed me a cup of tea, and rested her hand lightly on mine. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, she said, "You did the right thing." I exhaled. "It doesn't feel like it." She nodded slowly. "That's how you know it was." I thought about that, the weight of it, the quiet truth of it. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been. The rage had faded into something deeper, something quieter. Grief, maybe, for the family I had wanted, for the years I would never get back. I looked at her. I just keep thinking, how do you build something real after this? She smiled gently. One day at a time. We sat there until the fire burned low, until the house sank into the stillness of midnight. Somewhere the old magnolia tree rustled in the wind, and I realized this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. A new story. One I would write on my own terms. With honesty. With dignity. The way he would have wanted. The way I deserved. It was early evening when I heard the knock. Soft. Hesitant. I stood in the farmhouse doorway for a full 30 seconds before I opened it, bracing myself without knowing why. And there she was, Marissa standing on the porch with her arms wrapped around herself. No makeup, her hair pulled back in a loose knot. She looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe it was the first time I was really seeing her without the armor. "Hi," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. I wasn't sure if I should come. I didn't move, but you came anyway." She gave the smallest nod. "I didn't come to fight," she murmured. I wanted to talk." The old Evelyn might have stepped aside immediately, eager to please, desperate for some scrap of connection. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I held her gaze, searching for something, anything that felt real. After a long breath, I stepped back. 5 minutes, I said quietly. That's all. She exhaled in visible relief and followed me inside. We sat at the kitchen table, no tea, no warmth, just the creak of old chairs and the hum of the refrigerator filling the spaces between words. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "I don't know how to begin," she said. "I know how this looks. I know what I did, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not even sure I deserve to be here." I kept my hands folded on the table. "Then why are you here?" Her eyes, red-rimmed, tired, searched mine. "Because I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered. "Everything I thought I understood about us, about family, it's gone. And I know I played a part in that. I know I let things happen that I should have questioned." She swallowed, her voice shaking. "But I didn't come to beg. I came because I want to help." The words hung awkwardly between us. "Help," I echoed, careful. She nodded. "The research center, the youth programs, the environmental grants. I read about them. I've seen what you're building. And for once, I want to be part of something real, something good." I searched her face, every twitch, every breath. I thought of the years of manipulation, of twisted half-truths served as kindness. I thought of the way she had smiled as I was cut out of my grandfather's last days. But I also saw something else. Or maybe I imagined it. I wasn't sure yet. "I don't trust you," I said finally, my voice soft but unwavering. Her eyes dropped to the table. "I wouldn't expect you to." I hesitated, then asked, "Why now?" Her breath shuddered. "Because for the first time in my life, no one's telling me who to be. And without them, I don't know where to go." The vulnerability in her voice was unfamiliar, unsettling. I nodded slowly. "I'm not saying yes, I told her, but I'm not closing the door either." Her shoulders sagged slightly, the barest flicker of hope in her expression. "That's more than I deserve," she murmured. We sat in the quiet, after that two women bound by blood, broken by it, and maybe taking the first cautious step towards something neither of us had ever known. The next morning, the tension arrived before the sunrise. The first text came from Maria. "You're letting her in," after everything by noon. Two more messages from former colleagues. Then a quiet conversation with Alicia that left me uneasy. It wasn't just me anymore. People were watching. People had opinions, and not all of them were on my side. The community surrounding the research center, some of whom had read the quiet press coverage of the court case, began to question my decision to even let Marissa through the door. Rumors swirled online. Some accused me of weakness. Others whispered that Marissa was only pretending to change, positioning herself for a different kind of inheritance, public sympathy, a polished redemption arc. I sat in the center's meeting room, the blinds half drawn, my fingertips pressed to my temples, as Maria spoke bluntly. "She's playing you," she said flatly. "I know you want to believe people can change Ev, but she doesn't get to stab you in the back for years and walk through the front door like she's suddenly Mother Teresa." I sighed, exhaustion weighing on me. I don't trust her, I haven't forgotten? Then why give her the chance? I looked at Maria, my voice soft. Because if I close the door before it even opens, then I'm them. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. But they were true. I wasn't interested in revenge for the sake of it. I wasn't here to become the mirror of their cruelty. But that didn't mean I wasn't cautious. Every interaction with Marissa felt like walking a knife's edge, each word examined, each offer of help met with quiet suspicion. And the reactions around me were equally divided. Some of the younger volunteers at the center were surprisingly supportive, calling it brave, calling it healing. Others, especially those who had seen the devastation her family's actions had caused, warned me in hushed voices, "Be careful. People don't change that easily." One evening, I caught Marissa alone in the greenhouse, gently repotting young herbs. She looked up when she saw me, startled. "You don't have to pretend," I said quietly. Her hands stilled. "I'm not pretending." I studied her face, the tension still there beneath the surface, the performative polish that had once defined her. But there was also something raw, fragile, or maybe I just wanted to see it. "I haven't forgiven you," I told her. "And I may never." She nodded. "I know." But I added, "If you're serious about changing, then you'll have to earn it." Her breath caught. "How by showing up," I said. "Every day. Without expecting applause. Without expecting absolution." Her eyes glistened, but she said nothing more. She simply returned to the plants, her hands gentle, but her heart still perhaps unreadable. And I left her there, unsure if I was witnessing the first steps of something real or the most dangerous performance of all. The truth, I realized, might take years to reveal itself. And until then, all I could do was hold the line. The work became my anchor. In the months that followed the trial, the Heart Regenerative Research Center, once just an idea scribbled in the margins of my grandfather's old notebooks, began to grow in ways I never imagined. We expanded the Youth Science Initiative to 3 neighboring towns. We piloted a soil restoration program that caught the attention of 2 universities. And for the first time in my life, I felt I was living a version of myself that wasn't defined by rejection, by proving, by surviving. I was simply building. The community came together around the project. Local farmers, teachers, young students who had never before held a microscope or planted a seed with purpose. Every day I watched their eyes light up when they discovered something new, something they made with their own hands. It was the kind of quiet revolution my grandfather used to dream about. And then, unexpectedly, Marissa showed up. She came quietly at first. No fanfare, no grand declarations. She offered to help with logistics, fundraising events, community outreach, the types of things she had always excelled at in her former life. I let her help cautiously, watching her every step. To my surprise, she kept showing up. She stayed late after events, helping fold chairs and sweep floors. She smiled at the children with something that, if I let myself believe it, resembled sincerity. She asked questions, real ones, about the work, about the science, about the long-term vision. The others noticed too. Some remained wary, but over time, the sharp edges began to soften. She didn't ask for titles. She didn't push for recognition. She just worked. I wasn't ready to forgive her, but I could acknowledge the change, however small. One afternoon, as we watched a group of kids plant saplings along the north fence line, Marissa spoke quietly beside me. I never realized she murmured, her voice barely above the wind, how much I missed by being who I thought I had to be. I didn't look at her. I just nodded. "It's never too late," I said softly. "But you have to keep choosing it." We stood in silence after that, the wind carrying the laughter of children across the fields. And for the first time, I felt the faintest thread of something fragile, but real. An echo of hope. A beginning. A few months later, my grandmother moved into the small guest house we built beside the center. Her health had begun to fade, nothing sudden, just the slow unraveling of time. She resisted at first, still fierce, still independent. But eventually she agreed, and together we created a rhythm: morning tea on the porch, evening walks through the research fields, quiet conversations about my grandfather and the life they built long before everything fell apart. She seemed lighter here, less haunted, and I realized with quiet gratitude that in some strange way, we were both reclaiming something lost. Maria still visited often, always bringing laughter and gentle nudges when I slipped too deep into my own thoughts. "You're allowed to be happy, you know," she teased one afternoon as we tended to the herb garden, "even after everything." I smiled faintly. "I'm working on it." The center continued to grow. We secured new grants, brought in specialists, expanded our reach. But more than that, we created something lasting, something that would live beyond any one person's name. Sometimes at dusk, I'd walk the edges of the property alone, the soft hum of cicadas rising around me, and I'd think of him, of my grandfather's hands in the soil, of his quiet faith. That legacy wasn't about money or applause. It was about what you leave standing when you're gone. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I paused by the old wooden bench he built. I sat down, the wood still worn smooth from years of use, and I let the silence settle over me. The breeze stirred the leaves gently, and for a moment I swore I could hear his voice, soft, distant, but steady. "Kindness shapes the earth." I smiled, tears slipping down without permission. Not from sadness, not entirely, but from the strange, quiet fullness of a heart that had been broken and rebuilt. I wasn't the girl they once erased. I was still here, and I was finally home. Somewhere along the way, I stopped keeping track of what I had lost. The bitterness faded, not all at once, but slowly, like the way winter releases its hold on the earth inch by inch, and in its place, something quieter took root. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. I used to think legacy was something given to you, something carved into marble, passed down like a trophy or a burden. But I see it differently now. Legacy isn't what people leave you. Legacy is what you choose to build. Sometimes it means starting from scratch. It means stepping out of the shadows of people who never really saw you, who told you that you were too much or not enough, and deciding quietly, firmly, that their voices no longer get to define you. I thought for years that I had to earn love, that I had to prove my worth by being the right kind of daughter, the right kind of sister. But standing here in the middle of these fields my grandfather once walked, I realized something he tried to teach me all along. I was never the wrong one. I just belonged to a different story. The work continues, plant by plant, student by student. Some days are still hard. Some wounds don't close the way you hope they will. But I've stopped measuring my life by the people who couldn't see me. Instead, I measure it by the lives we're touching, by the hands that plant seeds and the eyes that light up when discovery blooms, by the quiet impact that doesn't make headlines, but changes everything. And maybe that's enough. Before he passed, my grandfather wrote a line in one of his journals that I carry with me still. Write the things they don't understand. One day the world will. That's what this story is. That's what I am. A story they never understood. But one day maybe someone else will. So I keep writing. And I keep living. One day at a time. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to ask you something simple. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee by your side? Or is it a late night where stories like this one keep you company, reminding you that you're not alone? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one with gratitude and care. And if this story touched something in your heart, I hope you'll consider subscribing to this channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness and healing and in second chances. Thank you for spending these moments with me today. Wherever you are, whatever road you're walking, I hope you carry this story with you. And I hope you remember sometimes the miracle doesn't knock loudly on your door. Sometimes it waits quietly, patiently, until you're ready to open your heart and let the light in. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.